Hello, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Liz Vickers and I'm the group publisher for Forensic Magazine. I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar sponsored by Life Technologies titled Maximizing the Power of Forensic DNA with the World's Most Powerful STR Kit. Today we will learn about the latest trends in global database expansion from a world-renowned expert in DNA database legislation, public policy, and law. We will also hear about the latest advancements in next-generation STR kit technology designed to meet international forensic loci requirements. The new GlobalFiler Kits deliver unprecedented capabilities, not only in terms of discrimination power and international database compatibility, but also in terms of efficiency, robustness, and overall ability to recover information from forensic samples. This webinar will demonstrate how the GlobalFiler Kits can enable you to go faster, go further, and go global. Following the presentations, we will have a Q&A segment. I encourage everyone to submit questions at any time during the presentation by typing your question into the designated section on your screen. We will get to as many questions as we can during the time allotted, and if we don't get to your question, we'll be sure to send a reply to you via email after the webinar. The presentation will be available on demand tomorrow, and you will be sent a follow-up email with the link to access the presentation anytime you wish over the next few months. Today's presenters are Tim Shellberg, President of Gordon Thomas Honeywell, and Nicola Oldroyd, Consultant Forensic Scientist at Life Technologies. Tim Shellberg is President of the Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs Firm. He manages the daily operations of the firm and provides consultancy services primarily in the Washington, D.C. and international divisions of the firm. Mr. Shellberg received his undergraduate degree from Washington State University in 1988 and his law degree from Seattle University in 1991. After law school, Mr. Shellberg served as a lawyer and a governmental affairs advisor to the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police. He then served as a partner in the Smith-Alling Lane law firm prior to becoming the president of Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs Firm in 2006. For the past 12 years, Mr. Shellberg and his firm have become the world's foremost experts on forensic DNA database legislation, public policy, and law. In addition to representing clients in the DNA industry, Mr. Shellberg has advised over 50 foreign and state governments on DNA database legislation, laws, and policies. In this position, Mr. Shellberg collaborates with foreign public security ministries, parliaments, and other law enforcement forensic organizations on a frequent basis. Our second speaker, Nicola Oldroyd, is a consultant forensic scientist in the Human Identification Group at Life Technologies. In this role, she's responsible for consulting on new product development projects, training, and developing the technical capabilities of Life Technologies' worldwide network of forensic field application specialists and providing support to forensic customers worldwide. Nicola resides in the UK but works directly with the US organization based in Foster City, California. Nicola began her career with the Forensic Science Service in Birmingham, UK, spending 3 years developing new STR multiplexes and supporting the establishment of the world's first national DNA database. Since joining Applied Biosystems in 1996, she has held a variety of roles, including Field Application Specialist and European Product Specialist. Nicola took up her current role in 2005 as a member of the Forensic Science Applications Group, a team of former forensic scientists tasked specifically with supporting the technical aspects of Applied Biosystems forensic workflow. Nicola has traveled extensively throughout the world, interacting with many forensic laboratories and scientists and presenting at international conferences. We are going to now begin the presentation with Tim Shellberg, and I want everyone to enjoy the webinar.
Good morning. Again, this is Tim Shellberg with the Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs Firm. Over the last 12 years, we have been sponsored by Life Technologies to provide information throughout the world on the establishment expansion of forensic DNA databases. What I'm going to share with you today is a kickoff for Ms. Oldroy's presentation, is some of the historical aspects of these databases and how they have changed and grown, and why now we're going to see this need for expanded loci set and what that means for the adoption of these newer technologies. So to understand where these databases come from, we have to understand the reason in which they were established, and that is to control crime. And crime continues to be a major part of every society in every corner of the world. For example, my presentation is not switching slides, so let me close out and restart it. For example, in South Africa, 1 in 2 women will be raped during their lives in this country, an amazing statistic that is common in many countries throughout the developing world. In addition, in the United States, over the last many decades, we've seen our crime rate rise 350%. Even though crime has stabilized, violent crime in the United States, we're seeing significant increases in property crimes. In Brazil, we see a homicide rate of amazing proportions. In 2003, 51,000 homicides. That is 5 times greater than the United States and 25 times greater than places like Japan. And in Southeast Asia, we see 200,000 women and children being victims of human trafficking annually. That's 1/3 of the global problem just in that little corner in the world. So with crime being prevalent and growing in society, we saw the application of DNA technology put into the use of policy to create criminal offender DNA databases. And there's 4 primary reasons why these databases are a good thing. One is that obviously they solve crime. In countries with robust, mature databases, like in the United Kingdom, the oldest in the world, we see hit rates that can reach 60%, meaning if you go to a crime scene and know nothing about the potential offender, you can identify that suspect with one simple test. Second reason is to reduce crime. We've seen many statistics, most notably out of Denver, Colorado recently, where they show that an aggressive property DNA program, testing program, that can reduce burglaries by 1/3. We also know that these databases exonerate the innocent. By quickly identifying the right offender, you don't have to interrogate an innocent offender, arrest an innocent offender, or even convict an innocent offender. And finally, these databases save money. Again, in the robust countries like United Kingdom, with these databases, United States, we're finding that with one simple test, a swab-first mentality in doing that test, you can solve a crime very cheaply compared to the hundreds of law enforcement hours it may take to solve that crime. So with these databases in mind, a number of countries back, we'll call them the original databases, between 1996 and 2000, roughly about 7 countries set up databases. The United States, United Kingdom, a few countries in Western Europe, New Zealand, and Australia. But when these countries set up these databases, they set them up with a few attributes and a few objectives in mind. One was they weren't designed, with the exception perhaps of the United Kingdom, to search against a very large category of criminal offender. For example, in the United States, up until about 2002, most of the laws on the books in the United States only required sex offenders to go into the database. We also saw that these databases the original adopters were originally designed only to search in-country searching, not thinking about international searching. And finally, we didn't see any talk regionally in different regions of the world about interoperability. Again, these databases were designed only to search themselves. With these policy objectives in mind, we saw most countries, with the exception perhaps of the United States, these original adopters use very limited loci because they didn't need to search against big databases, and therefore the chances of adventitious matches were low. So they set up limited loci. So from the original adopters, these 7 or so, have seen a lot of expansion in these last 12 years. We've seen now not 7 countries, but 44 countries that have passed legislation to set up a defined category of criminal offender, whether it be a convicted offender or a category of those convicted offenders or arrestees, being required to go into a database on a national basis and be searched against crime scenes on a regular basis. And of these 44 countries, which I've listed in the highlighted countries and then listed below, we believe that there are roughly about 40 million offender samples out there throughout the world. Much more, obviously, than the original databases between 1996 and 2000, where we only saw a few million samples. So now we have a lot of samples throughout the world and growing aggressively. So as we move from these original 7 to the 44, we have seen a new policy objective, a new reality in the growth of these databases. One, we're no longer talking about small in-country databases like I mentioned in the United States, which is sex offenders originally. We're seeing countries go in with the idea that they are going to set up all arrestee databases, have very large databases in the country. They start with that as their value proposition, and if the politics or privacy issues come into play, they reduce it from there. This is different than before, where countries would go in and say, we're going to start with a very small database. They're now starting with the idea that it's going to be large. Secondly, we're seeing that countries and policymakers and the public are starting to see the value of sharing these samples internationally. And there's going to be more public demand, more law enforcement demand to do this. The first, just to kind of give you some historical background here, the first government region to take this on was the European Union when they signed the Prüm Treaty in 2005, and subsequently the European Union Parliament passed legislation to require that all European Union members search against each other. Now, I think that the takeaway from this was this is a great idea, and the program's in development now and is actually started and is working and solving crime, but it's a very complex project that was made necessary by years of loci standards without regard to interoperability. Because they all set up their loci standards basically in a vacuum, they weren't able to easily share with one another, so they had to develop this very complex system to do this. However, by doing this, they've shown the world that there is value to international searching because of the hits that they're getting. A recent case that I just wanted to share with you involving the United States, that in 2004, 3 rapes occurred in parts of Southern California. The suspect was eventually identified, Ali Achexai, and he fled the country, set up an alias, and basically was gone. In 2009, a clever detective out of California read about the Interpol gateway that was more commonly being used, and submitted and figured out a way to get his profile submitted to the gateway. Then in 2009, the suspect was arrested for an attempted rape in Austria and sent to the gateway, where they got a hit. He was then extradited back to California and just recently convicted on all counts. I bring this case up because this was only one of a few times the United States has used the gateway, but it's going to start to grow. Word's getting out about international searching through cases like this. Again, the demand for international searching is going to be maximized, and more of it's going to take place, and therefore another reason why we need larger loci sets. Another part of the databases that we're seeing now that we didn't see before is that the policymakers and the public are demanding very highly accurate matching. There is no room for adventitious matches. It causes problems, and this is one of the other reasons that we're seeing the need for higher loci. And finally, we're seeing not just these 44 countries that we're going to have to be searching against in the future. The demand for databasing throughout the world is growing. We're seeing, by the discussions we're involved with parliaments throughout the world, ministries, law enforcement, and crime labs, we predict that we're going to grow from about 44 countries now that have this policy implemented nationwide to perhaps 75 countries and over 70% of the world's population being covered by laws with these databases by roughly about 2020. So with this large databases coming into fruition, we're seeing the demand for larger database subsets or standards to be implemented in order to maximize the ability to search large databases. So I think it's important to take a look at what the FBI did to do this. They were the first ones to take action on this. They said that they're going to mandate at least 20 loci plus 3, 23 loci combining the various loci standards from around the world, and make that the new requirement eventually in the United States. They obviously want to do this because our database in the United States has now exceeded 12 million, and they want to continue their perfect record, so to speak, to stop against adventitious matches. But they also recognize the need for international searching, and they want to create a global standard. The question then becomes, is how likely is it going to be that the FBI's new standard is going to be adopted globally? And therefore, these products that are being developed by Life Technologies will be adopted globally as well. How likely is this? I think it's very likely that the FBI standard will be adopted worldwide. And the reason for that is you have to take a look at what the FBI has accomplished. When the FBI set up the CODIS software, it was just for the use in the United States. But over the last 10 or so years, CODIS software has become the international matching standard. Of the 44 countries that currently have implemented the national DNA convicted offender DNA database programs, 29 of those countries are using CODIS. In addition, there are many additional countries using CODIS that have quite not yet gotten to the point of setting up these databases. But, and I think that by when we hit the 75th country, I wouldn't be surprised if over 60 countries are using CODIS. And what this means is that the FBI collaborates with crime labs, law enforcement officials throughout the world on a regular basis to talk about this CODIS software and deal with the different versions that come out. And because of that, they're a very trusted entity worldwide. And I believe as a result of that, the new loci standards will want to be adopted. Governments will want to adopt them worldwide, which means they will be adopting these new technologies being developed. So with that, I think that I've basically summarized that these databases are growing, the demand for international searches will grow, the demand to prevent against adventitious matches will grow, and therefore larger loci sets are being sent out, and these technologies are being produced, and we're going to see them implemented worldwide. So with that, I will turn it back to the organizer for Life Technologies to present.
Thanks so much, Tim. That was great. I'm going to now, we're going to hear from Nicola, and I'm sending it over to her.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you very much to Tim Shellberg for that very eloquent overview of the recent expansion of DNA databases and the ever-increasing need for cooperation and interoperability of the loci sets between international communities. What I'd like to do for the rest of this session is talk a little bit about what Life Technologies is doing to try to address the need for the chemistries that will support this ever-increasing expansion and cooperation. The GlobalFiler Kits are the focus of the rest of this presentation today, and what I'd like to do is just explain a little bit about what they are. Effectively, the idea behind the GlobalFiler Kits dates back right to the beginning of the process of the international community when they looked to expand the number of loci that were being utilized. Predominantly, this began in Europe in the middle of the last decade. And when Europe determined a new set of loci, an expanded set of loci, to help them cooperate better as a unit, as a continent, to help share data and have more commonality between those databases, a new set of loci was described, loci which hadn't been utilized in international databases before. Now, as soon as those new loci were described, we were already at that point up to something like 20 loci that were in common use across the international forensic community. So the idea of a large global system was being formed in the minds of our R&D teams. And over the last few years, they've been looking at the options, looking at the technologies, watching what the international community has been doing. And those developments, that increase in the number of loci being determined by different international jurisdictions, was encapsulated in the CODIS recommendations that have been published over the last couple of years. And on your screen now, you can see the current CODIS recommendations, the common loci in use in the European community, and then when you look at those proposed CODIS expansion loci, you'll see that it's a combination of the other common loci that are currently in use. And for the GlobalFiler Kit, our goal was to take all of those loci and combine them in single systems that could perform in forensic laboratories. Now, one of my goals for this session this afternoon is to answer some of the questions that we've been receiving whilst we've been talking to the forensic community about this system. And we have been having conversations about the practical development of these systems for probably about the last 18 months. One of the most common questions that we get is, why did we have to move to a new technology? And by a new technology, I'm meaning an extension to our die chemistry. We've moved to a 6-die system from the 4- and 5-die systems that we had been routinely using up until very recently. Our goal for new systems is always to make them stronger and better than the systems that have come before. Effectively, forensic laboratories have an expectation of the performance that they're going to receive. And in the last 2 to 3 years, we believe we've driven the development of those new chemistries. We've improved the performance and the capabilities of those systems. And when you're looking at a system that's going to be as big as this one, including all of those different loci, we need to make sure that we don't compromise on that, that we maintain and, if possible, improve on the overall performance of those systems in forensic laboratories so that capability is added and not removed. We did look at trying to fit all of these loci into a 5-die configuration. So this is all of the required and highly recommended loci on that CODIS list. On first look, it looks pretty good. Everything is there. But when we start to dissect this a little more, you'll see that certain parts of it might not be optimal for what the forensic laboratories require. In order to fit it into 5 dies, we ended up with multiple loci with a size range of greater than 400 base pairs. Now, anybody in a forensic laboratory knows that these are the first loci that are going to drop out under degraded DNA conditions, and we are pushing the sizing and resolution capability of the capillary electrophoresis platforms. You really have to have your sizing and resolution spot on in this area of the profile to absolutely make sure that you can detect all of those microvariant alleles that may crop up. We also couldn't fit enough markers into the bottom end of the profile. When you have fewer mini STRs, once again, you're looking at poorer performance on degraded DNA. It's much better if you can pack the lower area of your profile with some of the most powerful markers to try to give you the best discrimination power possible, even if you are only capable of obtaining a partial profile because the sample is severely degraded. In this configuration, we've only managed to get 8 loci where the entire size range is below 220 bases. We didn't think that was acceptable. Probably one of the major issues with this is the number of primer redesigns that would be required. Now, this was the best we could do to get everything into this configuration, and you can see by the red arrows on the left of your screen that we're looking at 6 different loci that required primer redesign, and of those 6, D12 and D1, 2 of the most discriminating loci in the system, have had to move out into this higher size range. So not only are we redesigning primers, which brings with it all sorts of complications, not only the concordance aspect, which I know many of you will have heard us talk about before. We believe concordance is extremely important, particularly with the numbers of samples currently on international databases profiled with earlier applied biosystems chemistries. What we need is a new chemistry to really match up to that, to have the same primers and give you those concordant results when you start comparing data. But also what you find with any primer redesign is you're taking a walk into the unknown. You don't know where and how that primer is going to seat onto the template. You don't know whether there are any new mutations in that area that you weren't aware of. You don't.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
As a result of a mutation, certain mutations can also cause incorrect genotypes, which is probably even worse. So another reason for us keeping the primer redesigns as minimal as we can is that we know the primers we're dealing with. We know their history, we know their performance, and we know what we're dealing with when we try to create a new, bigger, and better system. So we took a look at that configuration, and it really didn't meet all of the key criteria that we assigned to any new multiplex. There were too many compromises involved in making sure that it was a 5-die system. And we determined that we didn't want to make those compromises, particularly for a system that's destined for forensic casework. So we took the leap and moved to a 6-die configuration, and this makes things significantly easier. Again, one of the benefits of the fact that we haven't changed our primer sequences in the last 16 years since we released our very first chemistry. Not only do we know the performance of those loci, but we know where they're going to sit. We know exactly where they're going to be in the multiplex, and that means it's much easier for us to slot them into place. With this configuration, only 2 loci actually required any form of primer redesign, and for each locus it was only 1 primer. It was simply the reverse primer that we changed. Of those 2 loci, one is the DYS391, the YSTR marker that's been included in the CODIS recommendations as a redundant marker for amylogenin. So it's only there for gender redundancy, and we know it's a very stable locus with a very low mutation rate, and so the risk of moving that primer is very small. The other one we changed was TPOX, which sits up here. We have moved it out into the longer size range, but we felt that this was again an acceptable compromise because this locus has been downgraded from a required to a highly recommended locus in the new recommendations, and it isn't one of the most powerful loci in the system, so if it does drop out in degraded DNA, it isn't significantly going to impact on the discrimination power you're able to obtain. In addition, 97% of the alleles in the allelic ladder are now less than 400 base pairs in this configuration. Significant improvement on the 5-die design and a much greater performance capacity when you think about degraded DNA. And on the theme of degraded DNA, we've been able to pack the lower end of this particular configuration with 10 mini STRs whose size range is completely below 220 bases. And when you look at the probability of identity that you can achieve with these markers alone, if none of the others performed, we're in the region of 9 times 10 to the minus 12. Now, why is that an important figure? Well, when you consider the multiplexer kit, which was the first commercially developed chemistry specifically designed for degraded DNA, which shortened many of the amplicons in some of our other chemistries, the discrimination power that you can achieve with that chemistry of the 8 mini STRs it contains is about 1 times 10 to the minus 10. Now, previously, if you were utilizing a chemistry such as identifiler or NGM select, you might have needed to think very carefully about which chemistry to use first if you only had one shot at an amplification and you knew that sample was going to be degraded. Did you use your larger chemistry with the hope that you might get some of the longer markers, or did you go for the specific chemistry for mini STRs to guarantee at least some performance? Well, now with the number of mini STRs you have in the lower half of the GlobalFiler profile, you don't have to make that choice anymore. Your frontline casework and databasing system can now be your frontline system for degraded DNA as well. And if you do have the luxury of more than one amplification, then the multiplexer kit still adjuncts to the GlobalFiler kit perfectly and adds all of these additional loci, which, when you add it together, gives you a discrimination power of 5 times 10 to the minus 21. Now, just to put that into context, that is the equivalent of almost an entire NGM select kit profile, a chemistry that contains 16 autosomal STRs. That is a very powerful approach to degraded DNA. Just another little piece of information about the configuration, and I'm really focusing now on the gender determination markers because this is one of the things that sets the CODIS recommendations apart from some of the decisions taken by some of the rest of the international community. We've all known about amylogenin for a long time. It's a very common marker used for gender determination, but there are known mutations in the amylogenin lockers that can lead to dropout of the Y allele. So DYS391 was included in those recommendations to enable us to have some redundancy within the system. Now, it's a very good locus for this purpose. It's very stable, has a very low mutation rate, and probably more importantly, it's on the opposite arm of the Y chromosome to amylogenin, meaning that any mutation that knocks out part of the amylogenin gene is unlikely to also knock out the DYS391 area. The only issue here, the slight compromise we had to make, was putting it into the longer size range, which does make it a little bit vulnerable under degraded DNA conditions. So we've added an additional marker, a small indel marker, an insertion-deletion marker, that lies below amylogenin. Now, these are very simple biallelic markers where a certain sequence is either inserted or deleted, leading to the two forms of the allele that you see in the bottom right hand of your screen. On the left is the allele showing the deletion, and on the right-hand side is the allele showing the insertion. The gap between the two alleles in this case is 5 bases, because that's the length of the indel that we've chosen. Now, the Y indel is on the same arm of the Y chromosome as DYS391, but our mapping studies have shown that there is sufficient distance between the two that, again, a dual mutation hitting both of them is unlikely to occur. And the beauty of this is the length of the indel means that even in the most degraded samples, that required redundancy to amylogenin, for which DYS391 was included, is also there. And just to make it a little bit easier for everybody, we've actually kept all of the gender determination markers in one color, so you can see at a glance on your screen whether or not you've got the correct gender identification for that particular sample. Now, again, another goal of this system was really to try to make genotyping more effective and more accurate and more comprehensive. Many of our allelic ladders were developed many years ago before the massive expansion of international databases and the greatly increased knowledge about the marker ranges that we're dealing with. And so given that we're making a number of changes to this chemistry to make it more effective, to make it more powerful, we thought it was an opportunity, a prime opportunity, to expand those allelic ladder ranges so that we can genotype as many of the alleles that we know about now as possible within the hands of the unit. This will hopefully reduce the amount of analysis time each unit needs to spend. These are just two examples, although we have expanded more, as I'll talk about in a second. On the left-hand side is the D2S1338 locus, and you can see we've expanded the range of the ladder to the bottom for the GlobalFiler Kit. And then for D19S433 on the right-hand side, you can see again that the range is expanded at both ends of that marker, giving the laboratories much more comprehensive genotyping capability. Now, the development of the allelic ladder was probably one of the most complex aspects of this process, as you can see from the shot on your screen right now. It is by far the most complex and most comprehensive allelic ladder we have ever developed. 31 alleles in total have been added to 9 of the GlobalFiler Kit marker ladders, so a significant expansion on the number of alleles that can be genotyped. But in addition to this, we've also looked at the number of alleles that have been reported falling within the boundaries of those allelic ladders and added new virtual bins to again improve genotyping efficiency. In total, we have 343 physical alleles and an additional 246 virtual bins, totaling 589 alleles that can be automatically genotyped. Now, this should hopefully mean that there are fewer samples that need to be rerun and even fewer samples that need to go through some form of alternative processing to identify the alleles because they're falling too far away from the allelic ladders. The reach of these ladders has expanded, and therefore your efficiency of genotyping should improve. So what does that give you in terms of discrimination power? This is a very big system. The identifiler kit is probably one of the most common kit configurations in use around the world, and that gives us a probability of identity in the region of 5 times 10 to the minus 18. The NGM Select kit is our largest STR chemistry to date. It has some very discriminating markers included within it, including those new markers determined by the European community that now form part of those CODIS recommendations, and that's around 2 times 10 to the minus 21. GlobalFiler takes us on several orders of magnitude above that. We're round about, based on preliminary calculations, 7 times 10 to the minus 26, And all of those loci are useful. All of those loci are included in those international recommendations, so you don't have to discount any of them. All of that power is at your fingertips, so we should have the ability to be able to really take that level of discrimination forward. As I've already talked about, with the mini STRs, we're in the region of 10 to the minus 12. That's a huge amount of information, even in very difficult samples. So we will be able to reduce the risk of adventitious matches, particularly in the larger databases and when comparing DNA profiles internationally. A little interesting tidbit about the discrimination power is that when you try to think about numbers this big, it can sometimes be very difficult. Putting into context, the GlobalFiler Kits actually offer a power of discrimination that is 10 to the 14 times greater than the total population that has ever lived on Earth. Now, obviously, when the statisticians get their hands on numbers like this, you can twist them any way you like, and it never quite works out that you will never get a match between people using this chemistry. But what we can do is make sure that the risk of getting adventitious matches is becoming infinitesimally small. And so the power of that system to really deliver conclusive investigative leads, it has a real opportunity to be able to deliver. We do get a lot of questions about the compatibility of the new chemistry on instruments, particularly as it's moving to a 6-dye system. We've developed the chemistry for both the 9700 and the Verity thermal cyclers, so if you have either of those in your laboratory, you may continue to use them with this chemistry. The 3500 series genetic analyzers were developed to be 6-dye capable from the start. So instrument developments always take longer than chemistry, so it's always good to have the instrument platform ready to go before chemistry, because chemistry can be developed much more quickly. So the 3500 series are ready to go with the software that you have on those instruments right now. But obviously, not every laboratory worldwide has a 3500. There are a lot of laboratories using the 3130 series genetic analyzers and a handful using the 3730, the larger 48 capillary instrument. So in order to maximize the compatibility, what we have been able to do is extend the 6-dye capability through a minor upgrade to both of these instrument platforms to be able to allow laboratories to run them on their existing instruments. It is a minor upgrade, but of course you'll have to run a new spectral, a new matrix on those instruments, and you can see the new matrix standard on the left. It's not particularly exciting, it simply has the new dyes included in this new set and works exactly the same as the spectrals that you're familiar with. We have made a slight update to the GeneMapper IDX software version 1.4. Now anybody who has a 3500 knows that the software version 1.2 is capable of analyzing 6-dye data, but because of the inclusion of the haplotype markers as well as the autosomal markers in system, there were 1 or 2 nice changes for expert system analysis that we've made to really make that software completely compatible with the system. Particularly when you're thinking about database analysis, throughput's important, and we wanted to make sure that the chemistry development was backed out to make sure that the software was backing up the chemistry development. Again, ease of use is something that with a big kit like this, we want to make sure that every laboratory has maximum ease of use when they're implementing it. So we've actually implemented a new type of labeling on these systems, and the GlobalFiler Kits will be the first chemistry to be able to benefit from this. In the past, we've had some comments from our customers that the cardboard sleeve in which the kit boxes arrive contains the lot number. But if the boxes are then split up, as we recommend when they come into the laboratory, we end up with the lot number being separated from the individual components. That can make it difficult for the laboratory. It can also make it difficult for us from a troubleshooting perspective. So now what we have on the labels on the sleeve, we have a little peel-off label with the kit lot number that can either be transferred to the smaller boxes if you have a small number of kits in your lab, or if you receive larger numbers of kits, then we can provide that label to be able to put into a logbook, into your inventory store, so that you've always got access to the lot numbers of your kits. It's a much better way, we think, to link the kit components with their individual lot numbers to make sure that we can always trace where those components came from. So that's a little bit about the configuration and the way the kit will end up arriving in the laboratory, but what I'd like to focus on just for the rest of the session is the application-specific development and testing, because again, this is an area which has brought up a lot of questions as we've been talking to laboratories. In line with our recent developments, we're looking at a two-chemistry system, the same configuration but designed specifically to address the different applications within the laboratory. The GlobalFiler Kit is the high-performance casework application. The GlobalFiler Express Kit is the ultra-high throughput chemistry that deals specifically with single-source samples. Of course, it's possible to make a chemistry that does all the jobs. We've done it in the past with many of our older Amplistar chemistries. However, there are always compromises to be made. If you make it perfect for casework, it isn't perfect for databasing. If you make it perfect for databasing, it absolutely is not perfect for casework. And for us, compromise is a word we try to avoid. We want laboratories to have the maximum performance. And when you think about the different types of samples that the laboratory is receiving and the two different applications that are being processed, it's clear that it really does make sense to have specific chemistries to do specific tasks. For databasing, the samples are generally predictable. We have a standardized collection method. You know where they've come from. You know how much DNA is going to be on there. You know that they are supposed to be from one person, and they haven't been sitting around for a very long time. They've been stored and they've been shipped to you promptly and properly. You should be able to make that fast. You should be able to get a streamlined and high throughput operation for those samples with the minimum number of steps. Casework is completely the opposite. You have no idea what you're going to receive. You have no idea on what substrate it's going to arrive. Very little DNA is generally available. It could have a number of different contributors, and you have absolutely no idea how old it is, all of which cause challenges. And the workflows are entirely different. For the majority of laboratories, single-source, database-type samples, the goal is to get them through the process as quickly as possible. I'm fortunate I live in a country with no backlogs. And there are no backlogs because the highly efficient workflows have been adopted, and it's possible to get those samples through the labs quickly. We want to make it as easy and as simple and as straightforward as possible for laboratories to go from sample to answer in the minimum amount of time. Casework requires more investment, more time, more energy, more care, more attention. Because you don't know what you're dealing with, you have to suspect everything from your sample, and you have to check off every little aspect of that interpretation. Having said that, our goal for casework is to maximize performance while simplifying the interpretation so that we can continue to deliver the types of performance that you expect. Now, trying to marry all of that to the maximum extent in one system is virtually impossible. And so our goal is to develop the two chemistries which do the two jobs to the maximum possible. For the GlobalFiler Express Kit, we are utilizing the same types of direct amplification workflows that we've adopted for both the Identifiler Direct and the NGM Select Express kits, the forerunners to these kits, which have paved the direct amplification way. As you would expect, we can support all of the common sample types utilized for single-source database-type samples, be they on treated paper, such as FTA or copanucleocards, untreated paper, such as the Bode-Buckle collector or standard 903 filter paper, or buccal swabs of the infinite varieties that are out there. We've kept the workflows simple. For untreated paper and buccal swabs, we use exactly the same lysis solution on both of them, and neither of them require a heat step. So you're getting through this process very, very quickly. You can simply collect the sample, treat them with the reagents, amplify, and electrophoresis, and there's your result in as much time as it takes for your instrument to run it. And how long does it take to run it? Well, because we've developed the protocols according to a very strict set of DOE guidelines, and for those not familiar with DOE, that means design of experiments. It's a very common, a very well-defined method, but a very complex method of looking at every single parameter that you're utilizing and optimizing it for your systems. We've developed them on the Verity thermal cyclers, we've verified them on the 9700, and both of them utilize the same conditions that you see on your screen here. Now, when you look at the individual times for those different steps, I think you'll be able to predict roughly how much time that's going to take. And depending on the cycle number you're using, which will depend on your sample type and instrument type, you're looking at 39 to 40 minutes only to amplify those samples. A significant saving over Identifiler Direct, which is 2 hours 35, and even faster than our next fastest chemistry, the NGM Select Express kit. Now, how have we been able to do that? Well, we've actually reduced the reaction volume of the databasing system, and that's helped us give an even shorter time. Regardless of the sample type we're using, you can see in the table on the top left, what we're seeing is full success rates, regardless of whether we use the traditional 25 microliter volume or the new 15 microliter volume we've adopted for that system. And regardless of the sample type you're using, the data quality is exceptional. There is no compromise here, regardless of substrate and regardless of reaction volume. And that reduction in reaction volume gives you that reduction in time. Now, when we think about single source samples, it's all about success rate. And when we look at our population studies here, what you can see is that our first pass success rates are generally in excess of 95%. Blood is the easier sample type. It's far more heterogeneous. It's far easier to analyze. Buccal is always a little bit more challenging just because of the nature of the sample type. For a 95% success rate with a very short workflow time, that is a real efficiency saving for the majority of laboratories. And that just doesn't work in our hands, as you would expect. When we look at the laboratories externally, what you'll see is the average is about 94% first pass success rate. That is a really good base from which to build single source sample workflow. Now, a database system is designed for speed, it's designed for efficiency. And in many ways, it's the easier of the two systems to deal with because you know exactly what's going to be in that sample. It's very obvious to spot contamination. It's very obvious to spot a potential mixture which shouldn't be there. It simply negates the sample. That's not the case with casework. It's far more challenging to develop a system for casework. And so these are the different metrics that we need to make sure we hit with a casework performance chemistry. Very, very different to a single source sample. We need that high sensitivity for those low-level samples. We need to have balanced profiles to help with mixtures. If we can, we'd like to improve our tolerance to PCR inhibitors, but key to this is maintaining the high species specificity. You can make a chemistry as capable as you like. You can make it so tolerant to inhibitors, but generally the things that you use to encourage those types of performance characteristics also tend to have downsides associated with them, and one of those is the species specificity. What you tend to see is an increase in non-specific binding, particularly if you don't know anything about your primers. Again, another reason why we choose not to change our primer sequences unless we absolutely have to, because we know how they perform on all these species. We know how they perform in casework environments, and we're not giving you something that's completely unknown with which to take this big leap into a new era. Speed is not of the essence here, but we do need efficient thermal cycling conditions. And so what we've been able to do is make a few changes to those thermal cycling and reaction conditions, again, to help with the analysis of these samples. We've actually provided additional flexibility to the input volume of the sample that you're able to use. Currently, with all our other systems, you can only put in a maximum of up to 10 microliters of DNA. With this system, you can go up to 15. That specifically helps those low-level sample types without the requirement for higher cycle numbers, which can impact the balance and the performance across the whole range of samples that you utilize. So we can target the optimum cycle number, which for us is 29, with a 1 nanogram input of DNA. And because we've, again, optimized and utilized new technologies within the multiplex, what we can do is even for casework, bring down the cycling time to 1 hour and 20 minutes. Again, an efficiency saving which we'd like to afford, and we've still maintained that performance. There are no compromises here. And this is just an example of the sensitivity of the GlobalFiler Kit for casework. We're comparing it to the Identifiler Plus kit, which is probably our next most sensitive system. And although this isn't a quantum leap, it's not the same as moving from Identifiler to Identifiler Plus. What you can see is there are slightly more green boxes on the left-hand side of the screen for the very low input areas underneath 100 picograms than you have on the right. So we have enhanced the sensitivity slightly for those areas. And this is based on a 10 microliter input. You can improve that performance still further by upping that DNA input to 15 microliters. And we have been able to improve the performance in the presence of inhibitors. On the left is humic acid, and again we're comparing Identifiler Plus to GlobalFiler. Identifiler Plus is in blue, GlobalFiler is in red. What you can see is that both chemistries do really well in the presence of significant levels of humic acid, but we do significantly better with the GlobalFiler kit in the presence of hematin on the right-hand side of the screen. So we should be able to beat the levels of inhibition that are in operational forensic samples. No forensic sample is going to come in with just humic acid or just hematin. They're normally complex combinations of different inhibitors. So if we can give the maximum tolerance to a known inhibitor, we should therefore be able to deliver the inhibition tolerance for the inhibitors that we're not so familiar with, or the combinations of inhibitors that we're simply not able to test. Performance is key. Performance is paramount. We need to make sure that we're maintaining the levels of balance within the profile and the levels of balance within a heterozygote that we've been able to generate with our previous next generation kits, despite the increase in the number of loci. And we have been able to do that. We've maintained those levels and given very good levels of balance across the profile, whichever way you look at it. We've also managed to maintain the level of species specificity, very, very clear profiles. We do see some degree of cross-reactivity with certain species, in particular the primates, which aren't shown here, but it's certainly on the level with all of the other chemistries. And for stutter, which can sometimes be a complicating factor in interpretation, for many of the loci we've actually been able to lower the stutter percentage, particularly for some of the highest stuttering loci in the system. So hopefully that should simplify the data interpretation. By increasing performance, we need to make sure that we're maintaining those baselines that everybody's become familiar with, those clean, sharp baselines that simplify interpretation. Now, these are not our baselines. These are the baselines obtained by our test sites, and you can see here that the negative controls they're generating are very, very clean, and that will help with your interpretation. I've talked a lot about the kit, but really it's about the performance in the hands of our test site laboratories. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to say a very big thank you to all the laboratories worldwide who help us on a regular basis with our testing. These laboratories can challenge these chemistries far in excess of what we're able to do in-house, and without them, I don't believe the chemistries would have the levels of performance that we see here. So these are just a selected few examples. This is a comparison between the NGM Select kit on the left and the GlobalFiler kit on the right. Now, both of these are full profiled. But what you can see is that simply because of the increase in the number of markers that are present, you get significantly more information back from the GlobalFiler kit, which is able to deliver 36 alleles from this particular sample, but 26 alleles only from the NGM Select kit, simply as a result of the reduced number of loci. Now, this is a more challenging sample. On the left is the NGM Select kit again. This is a partial profile, which does indicate the presence of a mixture. Again, the GlobalFiler kit on the right confirms the presence of that mixture and gives more alleles back. So if those precious few alleles from the minor contributor are important, you're getting more information back. This sample is also obviously degraded. It's very low level and lost some of the higher molecular weight markers, but because of the concentration in the low half of that profile, we are able to get back much more information for that particular system. And then a comparison for the Identifiler Plus kit with the GlobalFiler kit. Now, on the left-hand side is Identifiler Plus. This is a bone sample. Again, we can see indications of degradation. We're losing some of the high molecular weight markers, which again, because of that concentration of markers in the low molecular weight end of the profile, we can see that GlobalFiler delivers more data. Now, this particular bone sample was old, but it wasn't what we would class as ancient. Where I think an example that gives us real strong indication of just how powerful this chemistry might be is a bone sample that's just a little bit older than this. And this is one that's been processed by one of our test sites. This was the bone sample of a very famous Austrian. Now, I must confess I didn't know who she was until I read up about her, but this was a remarkable woman. She was born in 1072, so a very, very long time ago. And despite the fact that she had more than 20 children, she died aged 71, and she was a member of a very important family across Europe. Her lineages stretched to the Holy Roman Emperors all the way through to the royal families of Central Europe. And this bone sample, being 900 years old, gives us this type of profile with the GlobalFiler Kit. There are results for every locus that should be on that profile. The only ones we don't see are the YSTRs, because this lady is obviously female. Now, I think it's data like this that really helps us to understand what we might be able to achieve with this chemistry, and it's where our little slogan comes from: go faster, go further, go global. We can go up to 5 times faster in terms of amplification than with previous generation kits. The GlobalFiler Express kit is 40 minutes amplification time, and the GlobalFiler Kit, despite being for casework, is only 80 minutes. Now, for single source samples, that will allow you to go from sample to answer in under 2 hours, and that includes all the preparation time for the samples and the instrument. It's not just the individual times combined. We hope this will enable laboratories to go further in terms of the amount of information they can recover. Those mini STRs are going to be very powerful in terms of increasing discrimination power, and we can get a significant increase, up to 9 orders of magnitude greater discrimination. And for those samples that are highly challenged, the enhanced buffer system and the improved sensitivity gives even better performance for inhibited and low-level samples. And if you add all of that together, the loci and the performance, it should enable laboratories to truly, the first time, go global. A single multiplex configuration designed for 2 different applications to perform both of them optimally, and give laboratories the option to use a system that makes them completely compatible with other laboratories worldwide, and truly starts to deliver the interoperability that Tim spoke about right at the beginning of this session. And that's pretty much everything I have for you today. I just want to say a very big thank you to a large team behind the development of the GlobalFiler Kit. I have the privilege of being able to talk about this system. In my 16 years with the company, it's probably the most exciting development we've ever put forward, but it takes a lot of people to put it together, and I'd just like to make sure that they get their due acknowledgement. And that is where I will finish my session, and I will turn it back over to the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That was fantastic. We do have a couple of minutes for some Q&A, so we're going to go ahead and get that started. If you have any questions, just type them in. Anything we don't get to, we will send a response after via email. The first question, when will the kits be released?
The GlobalFiler Express kit is currently available. We have a certain number of those chemistries actually on the shelf right now. So by talking to your local Life Technologies account manager, you will be able to find out when you'll be able to get hold of some of that, but that one has already been released. The casework kit is on a slightly longer development cycle because it's a more complex product, and we want to make sure it's absolutely ready for those casework samples, and that's anticipated to be ready in the spring if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or the fall of next year if you're in the Southern Hemisphere.
Great. And how is the resolution overall and specifically between the blue and purple dyes, since we currently see a lot of pull-up into the yellow and red dyes currently?
That's a really good question, and obviously it's a concern to laboratories when they're looking at new dye sets. Are they going to see some of the challenges they may have experienced previously? So far, our experience with this new dye set has been very, very positive. We get very clean baselines and very good separation between the different dyes, providing the spectral is set up well to start with and obviously monitored over time. Most laboratories should expect to be remaking their spectrals at least once a year. Some laboratories make them significantly more often than that, but in general, the spectrals that we've seen, the quality of the spectrals, particularly with the new dyes, has been excellent, and we don't anticipate any issues with that.
Okay, great. And the next question, could you please repeat the kit lot number, new system way that you've mentioned earlier?
I believe that's referring to the new labeling scheme that we have for the chemistries. The way that we ship out our chemistries currently is that they come in a cardboard sleeve, and within that cardboard sleeve are a number of different boxes containing the different components that need to be moved into different areas of the laboratory. One of the comments we've had in the past is that when you separate those components from the cardboard sleeve, which normally gets discarded, the lot number becomes separated from the component boxes, and that can make it difficult for the laboratories to track which lot numbers apply to which component kit boxes, and it makes it difficult for us to troubleshoot also on some occasions. So the cardboard sleeve will actually have a large label on it, and part of that label are peel-off sticky labels. So what you can either do is peel off those sticky labels that contain the lot number and apply them to the individual boxes within the cardboard sleeve, or if you receive a large kit shipment and that's not practical, you can take one of those sticky labels from that cardboard sleeve and apply it into your laboratory logbook or inventory book or wherever you track all of your consumables within your unit, and you will then have a direct relation of the lot number to the kit components that you have within the laboratory at that time.
Okay, great. How does this system perform with POP7 polymer?
Right, so that's, again, a very good question. We have optimized the GlobalFiler kit similarly to what we have with the other chemistries on the POP4 polymer. We appreciate that laboratories are sometimes looking at utilizing single polymer for multiple applications on their instrument. We have looked at the POP7 polymer. It works on POP7 on the 3730 platform for the Global Express kit only. But one of the issues we found, and it's not unique to this chemistry, it also applies to some of our other chemistries which have low molecular weight loci, is that in some cases artifacts can start to encroach into the very low levels of that profile. And again, from an interpretation standpoint, we don't believe that that's a compromise we wish to make. We are continually evaluating new polymer types that might allow us to have a single polymer that can be used by laboratories that do both genotyping and sequencing, for example, because we know those laboratories would wish to use a single polymer type and currently have to switch between two on many occasions. So we are continuing to evaluate new polymers, but this chemistry is designed for POP4, and we don't recommend the use of POP7 on the 3130 or 3500 platforms.
Okay, the next question. Have you any data of this kit on the 3730 instrument, and have you noted some issues with primer-dimer peaks interfering with the allele calls?
We have run the GlobalFiler Express kit only on the 3730 platform, so it is the 3730, not the 3730 XL. We don't support that for any of our chemistries. We only support single source databasing applications on the 3730, and yes, we do sometimes see some artifacts creeping into the low molecular weight range of that profile. It is something to be aware of. It's something that would happen with other single source chemistries as well that have amplicons down in that region of the profile. The data that we've seen, the laboratories have told us they can interpret around that, but obviously it's something to monitor and manage.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up. I think we have time for about one more question, and then anything. There's a lot of questions that did come in, but we will definitely get these forwarded to the speakers so that they can answer that via email online to you. The last question we'll ask here today is, what is the cost comparison, the ID Plus to the GlobalFiler casework per kit?
Okay, so overall in terms of pricing, I can give you pricing for the GlobalFiler Express kit right now because that's a fully released chemistry. The casework kit is still in development, so I'll just get that to a moment. So if we just take the 200 reaction GlobalFiler Express kit, the list price for that is round about the same as the Identifiler Direct kit. So those two are directly comparable. And for the larger package size for the GlobalFiler Express kit, for the 1,000 reaction size as opposed to the smaller 200, there's a 10% discount for the additional volume. Now the casework kit, as I mentioned, isn't fully available yet, so the final pricing hasn't been determined for that chemistry, but any increase compared to the GlobalFiler Express kit is expected to be insignificant. So it's going to be roughly in the same ballpark, so I think you will probably be pleasantly surprised when you look at the comparisons between the different chemistries.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. It was fantastic. I definitely want to thank our great presenters, Tim Shellberg and Nicola Oldroyd, for the very informative discussion. The contact information is listed here, and you can feel free to email us with any further questions and visit www.lifetechnologies.com for more information. And again, thank you for attending today's webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.